In this video, we're going to talk about some of the log files that you can get from ISMIGRATE. The basic log information that's always generated with ISMIGRATE is the out and the error.log files that are generated in variants bin folder. Now remember, if you include a C in your command, ISCMigrate or ISCRun, then this information is going to go to the console instead of these log files. When ISMIGRATE searches through a directory to find files that it can migrate, it generates ismigrate_error.log to list all of the files that it found that weren't indexed files that it was able to handle. This includes properties files, classes, text files, etc. As ISMIGRATE converts each file, it writes its progress with a summary at the end in ismigrate_out.log. If you're verifying records, then it will write that progress and a summary in this file as well. There are three other types of logging that ISMIGRATE does. To see the migration of every record, you can turn on ISMIGRATE logging with the value of 1. Now this will write to a file called ismigrate.log. You can change the name of this log file with the ismigrate log file variable. The GUI wizard has an option to check for this and a field to change the name. ISMIGRATE from the command prompt will use the two configuration variables here. You can also create a dump file for problem records. You set ISMIGRATE logging to 2 instead of 1. Now you'll also need to set the ignore write errors to true, so that once ISMIGRATE reaches an error, it will continue. In the wizard, you would check the checkbox to generate these dump files. If you're running ISMIGRATE from the command prompt, you'll use the two variables here. And if you turn on record verification, ISMIGRATE will also read both the input and the output records after the migration is done to validate that the data in them is the same. And this output is written to the dump file as well, and it's mostly useful when you're migrating to a relational database. If you're using the wizard, check the box in the wizard. If you're running ISMIGRATE from the command prompt, set ISMIGRATE verify record to true. Let's take a closer look at these log files. I have a JISAM file called IDX file. I want to migrate those records that are dated from 1950 or greater to a Maria database. Now I'm going to use two programs to do this along with ISMIGRATE. One is a hook program called datehook, and that's where I'm going to filter out the records that are prior to 1950. The other program is going to be generated by EDB-IIS, and DM is the switch to use for Maria, and I'm passing the extended file descriptor, the XML file that I created for my data file. This is a bridge program that will be created with embedded SQL so that the data can be written to the database. Once that bridge program is generated, then I'm going to compile it. Then I'm going to run ISMIGRATE from the command prompt. Now I'll be using these properties. I'm setting my hook program here to datehook. I'm setting ISMIGRATE logging to 2. I'm changing the name of the log file to convert.log. I want it to keep going if it finds an error. I want it to verify the records. And these are the variables that I need in order to run ISMIGRATE from the command prompt. I'm telling it that the input file is JISAM, the output is EasyDB or our database bridge. Here's my connection strings for Maria database and a couple of other variables that I need. So let's execute that. And then we have a compile for datehook, create the bridge program, compile the bridge program, and then migrate the data file. And it's done. I'm using DB Visualizer to look at my tables. I will refresh, and here's my IDX file. Let's take a look at the data. It had 10 records in it. I can see that 7 were converted. With just a quick look, I can see here that there's something going on with this date. This is the default value that is written to a database if the date is invalid in the JISAM file. So let's look at our log files and see what's going on. The first one is ISMIGRATE out.log. It's in my bin directory. Now my datehook program did a display of the record that it was skipping. That display gets written to this out program. So here's my 3 records that were skipped. and the progress of the migration. And then it verified the data, and there's the verification progress. And here's what the outcome was. Some records were skipped. So it read 10, it wrote 7, it skipped 3, and only 6 of the 7 were verified. Well, we know that there's a problem with a date in one, so that's probably what's going on. Let's take a look at another log file. We have a convert.log. Let's take a look at that. Here are the instructions that ISMIGRATE used. Here you can see that the file was opened, and then either the records were written or they were skipped. And it tells us that the skipped file information was written to the dump file. So let's look at the dump file. So here is the hex value of the 3 skipped records. It uses hex because it doesn't know what kind of data it's seen. So it's going to give you the hex value. But I can see that there were 3 skipped, and then during the validation there was a different record. So here's the original, and I see some values here and here are different between the migrated and the original. So let's talk about that date a bit. This is the program that created the file and has the date values. In COBOL and JISAM, having 9s or spaces in a date value is fine. In a relational database, it isn't. So I have some options of how to handle this. I used an EFD directive stating that this was a date. I could take this date off and it would migrate the data as alphanumeric rather than a date. I could fix the date, of course, in the JISAM file or later in the database. You saw that it used the default date of 9999-1230. I could set a different default date with iscobol easydb.inv_date. Or I could write something in my hook program to handle invalid dates, perhaps getting information from a different field or assembling a date depending on some other criteria. So there's some information about logging and how to find out what's going on when you're migrating your data files. I hope you give it a try. If you have any questions, you can contact us at support@variant.com. Thank you.